Hello, friend, and welcome back to the She Lives Purposefully podcast. My name is Megan, and I am so thankful that you are here. I'm so thankful that you're listening. I don't take it lightly that you are taking the time to do that. And I'm so thankful too for all of your shares, your subscribes, your reviews. Thank you, because that is directly helping the podcast to reach new women, to encourage and equip them in their walk with Christ. It's directly keeping the podcast in the top 50 Spotify religion and spirituality charts, which it's been up there for months at this point. I think it was October and now it's February. So that's so mind-blowing. And two, it's been in the top 20 for over a month now, I think, which is just so incredible. And I'm so just thankful for you and this community that we have here, all of you. It's such a sweet thing. So thank you guys so much. Today, we are going to be talking about something that we have never discussed on the podcast yet. And we are going to be talking about drinking. This is something that, depending on who you talk to in the church, you can get a drastically different opinion on. So today we are going to dive in. Does the Bible say that drinking is wrong? Is it wrong for you specifically? And why does there seem to be a sober trend from everyday people to major celebrities happening in our culture? I cannot wait to have this chat with you and with our guest, Christy Osborne. I will let Christy introduce herself later on too, but Christy is a certified sobriety coach, co-host of the podcast, But Jesus Drank Wine and Other Stories That Kept Us Stuck, and is currently writing the book, Love Life Sober, Finding Freedom from Alcohol in 40 Days. She has helped women get back in control of alcohol all over the United States and the United Kingdom. And I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with you. Before we do, I want to tell you about today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is one of my go-to makeup brands that I feel so safe using. Here's why. It's toxin-free, organic, and clean. Because due to the lack of regulation, the United States Food Administration permits cosmetic companies to use toxic chemicals known to be harmful in their products. And we hear this word toxic thrown around over and over again. And I think sometimes we can almost dismiss it because we hear it so much, but this is what that means. Chemicals linked to cancer, endocrine disruption, reproductive toxicity, developmental toxicity, immunotoxicity, organ toxicity, neurotoxicity, and many other health concerns are hidden in the cosmetics that women are using in their everyday bodies, in products that I was using before. When I first learned this, I was stunned and I wanted to see what I could do to change the products that I use. I am so thankful for Crunchy, a beauty company that sells skincare and makeup. Crunchy is a toxin-free, like I said, organic and clean beauty company that sells those things. The skincare, which is fantastic. My mom has a lot of it. She loves it. And their makeup too. I'm literally placing another order today. My favorite products are their foundation, which I need to add to cart, their blush, eye cream, and concealer. I'm adding those basically all to my cart too. You can get $10 off of your first order of Crunchy using the link crunchy.com/Megan Edmonds. That's crunchy.com/Megan Edmonds. Make a safe, toxin-free switch to clean beauty today. You owe it to yourself. Okay, let's start this conversation.
Hi, Megan.
Hi, Christy. Thank you so much for joining me on the She Lives Purposely podcast. It's such an honor to have you here. I am so excited for today's conversation. Before we dive in, why don't you just introduce yourself, tell those who might not know you, who you are, what you do, and all the good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, guys. I'm Christy Osborne. I'm originally from Los Angeles, but I'm actually talking to you guys today from London, England, where I've lived for the last, almost 15 years. So, the majority of my adult life. And I'll get into kind of like all of it when I tell my story, but I am a certified sobriety coach. So, I help women who want to take a break or find freedom from alcohol. Normally it's wine with a lot of moms. And I have a podcast and I have a book coming out next year. We can get to all that kind of later. But yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited to have you on. And I think just today's conversation is so good. We're talking about drinking, and it's just such an important conversation because I think alcohol culture is so prominent, it's so trendy, it's so common, but it can be really harmful as well. And I think we're even seeing like a kind of interesting to me at least, like cultural shift of people turning from alcohol, from like people I'm just seeing on Instagram or whatever to like really big celebrities who are deciding like, okay, I'm done. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm excited to dive into all the things, but yeah, tell us your story. Yeah, we would just love to hear more about your background and yeah, just your story.
Yeah, totally. So basically, I mean, as far as kind of drinking is concerned, I had my first drink, I think it was junior year of high school. And I tried tequila with my best friend when her mom was out of town, and it was disgusting. And I think we both vomited, and it was really gross. But I never, like, in the kind of the high school like days, which is where some women and a lot of the women that I talk to, especially from the US, get hooked, is kind of these early high school days is when they start this drinking relationship. I was very much like not loving the whole being out of control thing. I really liked being in control. So it didn't really take off for me until much later. I after high school, I went to college. I went to USC, University of Southern California. I was in a sorority there. And like definitely did my fair share of drinking, don't get me wrong, but it was still like I was the one that, made sure all my girlfriends got home at night and like made sure everybody was safe because like I was really worried about like, what could happen if blocked out in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. Seemed like a really scary situation. So, didn't like definitely did my fair share of drinking, but it didn't get to any sort of problematic level. In college, my junior year at SC, I came over here to London. I studied at the London School of Economics, and wine and alcohol in England is huge. There's a massive, massive, as everyone probably knows, right? You meet at the pub. Everything that you do revolves around drinking, kind of when it comes to being social. So I think that was kind of like the first uptick, I would say, in like kind of my drinking relationship was when I studied abroad for the first time. After college, I went to law school at Pepperdine, and drinking kind of took on. I kind of gave drinking, and it was mainly wine at that point, like a new job of helping me manage stress and cope with the stress of law school, right? And it's in law school where I met my now husband, Chris. Like, wine was a very big part of our love story. Like, we got really into wine. We started collecting wine. We went to Napa. We went to a lot of places in France, and just like we became obsessed with it. We loved it. It was a very, very big part of our like dating story and our love story. We got married right after Pepperdine finished, passed the bar, moved over to the UK again because my husband had a job offer here. We told our families in the States that it was just going to be like a 2-year adventure. And then we ended up staying for 15 years. But so we moved over here and I worked for a little bit in Parliament, and then I got pregnant with my daughter, Ella. And when she arrived on the scene, I was very much entrenched in the mommy wine culture thing, which we can like delve into. That could probably be a whole new episode, but the mommy wine culture thing, right? Where it was like, if you basically need alcohol, you need wine in order to parent, as this reward for being a mom because you've had a really long day. And all of my new mom friends around me drank. I didn't have family here. I didn't know anybody else that was a mom yet. And so I joined all these groups, and that's kind of what we ended up doing, is like rocking our babies and sipping on rosé. And so that's when it like went from that's when like I kind of gave wine the job of being my reward, right? And in addition, and a coping mechanism again. And then 2 years later, I had my son, Carter. And with him, he was like a really scary birth. It was an emergency C-section. He ended up in the neonatal unit for a few days, and I had really bad postpartum, and I drank to cope with this feeling of like, I am a subpar mom because I am not connecting with my baby. And and again, like this could be a whole nother episode too, but I think as women, we do ourselves a disservice by not talking about this kind of stuff. We've gotten a lot better about it. We have, but until it's too late, right? So I was really suffering, but I was just looking to alcohol to like numb out from that pain and that suffering. Um, and so then that was just like, again, that coupled with mommy wine culture, this was the thing to do. This is what I was supposed to be doing. And if I couldn't handle it, like if there was a problem, then that was obviously, and this is what we're told from societal conditioning, that something was wrong with me, as opposed to something being wrong with the alcohol, which is a drug. And then in 2018, I lost my mom, and we had like a very like complicated relationship in that, like she had a complicated relationship with alcohol. Growing up, she never drank, and she didn't start drinking until I was in like my mid-20s. And she basically it changed her, it changed her personality. It made like it created so much distance in our relationship because she was irritable all the time. She would get frustrated that I was living abroad and I had the grandkids over here, and so it just put like a huge strain on our relationship. And so when she died, I drank to cope with the loss of losing her. So again, it was giving alcohol this new job of like, this is what I need to handle grief now. And I drank really heavily. And by drinking really heavily, because everyone always asks, well, how much was that? It was like 3 or 4 glasses of wine at home, and then more if I was out. But I was drinking pretty much every night. It was normally wine. And I kind of did that from 2018 to 2020. And I woke up on the anniversary of her death, March 9th, 2020. And I literally just went into the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and I just prayed like, Jesus, I can't do this anymore. I was exhausted. I had no patience with my children. I was fighting with my husband all the time. It felt like everything was falling apart. And all I wanted to do was be like numbing that pain that I felt. And so, he's so good and he's so great. And he took this like huge weakness. My sobriety Bible verse is 2 Corinthians 12:9, right? His power is made perfect in our weakness. And that's exactly what happened. It's like, I ended up getting super curious about how alcohol was affecting my brain and my body and my sleep and my relationships. And I started researching and reading everything that I could get my hands on and doing every single like course I could take just to figure out like if my life would be better without alcohol. And this magic thing happened, like by the grace of God, that I totally lost the desire to drink. I didn't need willpower. It's one of those things I can now be around it, but I don't crave it or anything, because I know how it made me feel. And I was able to see the difference while learning about it. And so, yeah, I mean, long story short, that kind of spiraled into my now coaching career. In the kind of those early days of not drinking, I started to get really, really like loud on my personal Instagram about what I was doing. And I had so many people just ask me questions about, okay, like how has it been? How is your sleep? Are you losing weight? Has your relationship with Chris improved? Chris is my husband, obviously. And all these questions. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, God, is this what I'm supposed to do? Like, is this my purpose? Is this my purpose, is to like help people that felt really stuck and really alone and really overwhelmed by this substance that I was ingesting every day. So yeah, and that's kind of how I got here.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for telling that. I'm so sorry for the loss of your mom. And it's the hard things you've been through. Thank you for sharing that all with us. There's so many things you were talking, and I'm like writing things down. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to like ask all these questions that I didn't even have like prepped. But first of all, you mentioned you worked in Parliament. What does that mean? That sounds very
so it's basically the UK's equivalent of Congress, right? And so I worked for two members of Parliament, like doing all sorts of really fun things, researching, speech writing.
Wow.
I was a real political junkie for a while, and I just, it was so fun. And I got to be in, where Big Ben is, in the Houses of Parliament every day. And it was super fun. Yeah, it was so cool. But fun fact about the Houses of Parliament, there are like, I don't know, I knew, gosh, I'm going to screw this up, but there's something like 15 bars, like actually in the building. So again, it was like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock would roll around. And you had a meeting in Parliament and the wine was open. It's
Yeah.
the big British boozy culture.
Right.
It's like you drink everywhere you look, you're drinking.
Yeah, I remember you saying that while I was listening to your podcast, that it was like in the building, which is just, I think really speaks to, like how emphasized it is. That's crazy. Wow. Yeah. Well, I just was curious about that. That's a total pivot from our conversation, but
that's okay. I like it.
I know it just, it was so fascinating to me. I loved too, and we can dive more into this later, how one, just the verse that you brought up, his power is made perfect in my weakness. And I feel like that's just such an encouragement for so many people, whatever their struggle may be, because I feel like sometimes we can feel so like condemned or trapped or like burdened by something that we feel like we can't conquer maybe, or, that we feel like has made us feel just gross. And to know like the Lord's power is made perfect in like it's not my power, it's not my strength, it's not my like ability to like rock, like it's him. So I love that verse. And too, that you were saying learning, I feel like, about alcohol and its effects, and then how it made you feel was a big like kind of motivator for you to stay away from it. Like it kind of took away all desire for you in a sense, right? Is that
Yeah. So we are, there's the cool thing about this is that when we talk about the mind and renewing our mind and subconscious mind, like all of this stuff is in the Bible. And when I was doing my coursework, I was just learning it. And then when I would go back to the Bible, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so cool that this is actually the answer, right? So we basically, in our subconscious, take in something crazy like 4 billion bits of data like a minute. And so, in our I know it's crazy, in our subconscious mind, we end up developing these beliefs. And these beliefs are like what alcohol is going to do for us, what kind of benefit it's going to give us, right? And so, for example, I had a really like strongly held belief that I believed red wine helped me sleep. A lot of people still have the like firmly held belief that red wine's good for our health, which we could talk about, and that it helps us, be more fun, be more social, connect with our friends, connect with our spouses, helps with grief. Like I clearly proved that, I clearly tried to prove that one, and all of these things. And so the key to kind of unlocking this freedom for myself and for the gals that I coach is just like figuring out if those beliefs are true or not, right? And so, like, if we take, for example, the belief that I needed red wine to sleep, when I learned that, when you drink, it's a major sleep disruptor, you don't get your proper REM sleep. It basically just sedates you. So you can log 10 hours at bed, but you might only be getting 1 to 2 like restorative, like sleep like the sleep that your brain needs.
Wow.
And so when I learned that while I wasn't drinking and felt the actual effects of like good restorative sleep, I was like, okay, well, that belief's out the window. There's no reason to reach for the glass for that reason anymore. Okay, what's next? And slowly going through all those reasons, figuring out if wine is really doing the things that we're drinking it for.
Yeah. That's so good. And it's so interesting because it sounds like, and maybe this is part of like a big cultural shift that's happening, but we're kind of learning so much about the power that alcohol actually has. I've read articles where it's like, the new like cigarette almost, where like you learned all these things and then people stopped smoking as much, and it's kind of like recognizing, oh, it's actually not helping me any, like it's having the opposite effect. I want to dive into all of that later, but first I would love to cover just like biblically, because the title of your podcast, which is, it's so fun to me, it's so cool, but Jesus drank wine and other stories that kept us stuck. So I would love to talk about like biblically, the Bible does not say that drinking is wrong. It says that drunkenness is a sin, but drinking is not. In Ephesians 5:18, that's a specific verse where it talks about not getting drunk with wine. But, we see, I think it's 1 Timothy 5, Paul advises Timothy, have a little wine for the sake of your stomach. And Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding. So we have those stories. And I think those are a lot of common things we go to. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I think on the flip side too, though, we see that no, drinking is not wrong. And only drunkenness is wrong. But we also see a big call for us to be wise, to be mindful of others. And I think not just embracing maybe what we're allowed to do, but is that what is actually going to be beneficial for others, in whatever they may be working through something, but also for ourselves, what is actually going to be beneficial to that. So I'm curious your thoughts, in relating different verses or arguments that oh, I can drink or something like that. How does that work into, I guess, your mindset with drinking and where you're at right now?
Yeah, such a great question. So the name of the podcast came about because for both me and my co-host, it was one of those kind of stories, but Jesus drank wine. It was one of those stories that we were telling ourselves as support of why we could continue going down the path that we were going down. And what I've since learned is it's not about how much wine, and we can get into this because it's so interesting, how much wine Jesus did or didn't drink. It's about why am I asking that question in the first place? Is it because I want to justify my current habits and then taking that further, but are those habits getting in the way of my relationship with Jesus? Can you see the fruits of the Spirit in me? Well, obviously not self-control. You know what I mean? So it's just, are we trying to use that fact as justification for our behavior? Is the real meat of it, but then also looking at what wine actually was in the Bible. It was very, very different, right? They didn't have the same fermentation process that we do now. It was very, very low alcohol content, very low ethanol content, something between 2 and 4%, where now we've got between 10 and 12%, sometimes more. It was also used as something to make sure that water was drinkable, because and that's what the Timothy verse is about, right? Is that you couldn't drink water back then because it would give you all sorts of crazy diseases. Yeah. So you had to have a small amount of alcohol in there in order to make the water pure. And so not pure, but in order to make the water drinkable and not make you sick. There's also tons of references kind of in the Bible about the translations, in Hebrew. A lot of them are just saying grape juice if you translate them literally, but we read them in the Bible as wine. So there's a lot of scholars that will say that there's a lot of the time that wine is mentioned in the Bible, it's not even wine that is containing alcohol, it's just grape juice, because that's what it was. So it's just so different. It also wasn't readily available, obviously, like it is now. You can't get it, postmated to your door. Yeah. And at the grocery store, it was very, very hard to come by. It took a long time to make. And so it's just so different, right? And so you also, going back to the alcohol content, wouldn't get, what we would say drunk after 1 or 2 glasses. It would take for us as petite women a lot more glasses. So it was it's a totally different ballgame. And so that's when it was just okay, this excuse, this story that I'm creating in my brain for reasons to keep drinking, again, just doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. I love so many things that you said, but one, I think really recognizing, because I've heard that a lot too, for example, in the story of Jesus turning water into wine, that wine was a very different thing back then. It wasn't necessarily what we have today. And so taking that into, account. But two, I just, I love that you were saying the heart behind why you were asking those questions is really what was so much more important. Like using it as kind of this like freedom to continue to do what you were doing, to be in the habits that you were in, versus maybe something else like seeing like, all right, is this beneficial for me? And like you said, like, are the fruits of the spirit evident in my life right now? And then I'm blanking on the verse, but there is a verse where it really does contrast like drinking and being drunk with like wine or alcohol versus like being filled with the spirit, and almost like those two things are really like contradicting each other. So yeah, I love, and maybe if you could elaborate too more on like that aspect of like why you were, or the heart behind like wanting to dive into those verses and those stories, or like clinging to those stories to continue in your habits.
Yeah, yeah. So, it just it was kind of just giving, again, like justification to keep up with the behavior, and like when I looked specifically at, the fruits of the spirit, I think about, obviously there was not a lot of self-control happening because I couldn't stick to one glass, but that is because alcohol is so extremely addictive. Like it calls for us neurochemically in our brains to want that dopamine hit after we've had the first one, and then when I looked at patients, like I obviously was not very patient with my kids when I had like a low grade hangover every morning. And then another big one for me too was joy. What I didn't know, which is so fascinating, is that when we drink a glass of wine, we do get this like, feeling of euphoria.
Mm,
That's a result of the dopamine that is going on in our brain. But it's an artificial level of dopamine, meaning it's so high and that we can't do it from doing, like, we can't get that level of kind of high, that happy feeling by doing normal things in our day to day, which is like hugging our kids or petting our dog or having a good meal. It's so high that our brain has to counteract by releasing a chemical called dynorphin. And dynorphin brings us down. It's a sedative, it's a depressant. So it's
mm,
battling this high. And
wow.
so what happens when you're a regular drinker like I was is that my body's constantly producing this chemical dynorphin, which is bringing me lower and lower and lower. And so you lose your joy. And this is where like I get, I'm on Zoom calls with clients and we're both weeping because you realize when you get your joy back what that feels like compared to kind of constantly having this like downer in your system all the time. And so yeah, it's just like when I thought about like the fruits of the spirit and my relationship with Jesus, it was like, why am I trying to justify this behavior, which is obviously just moving me further and further away from all of these things?
Yeah, that's so good. And two, just combining the very practical aspects of like, all right, like this chemical's being released, which is really taking away like joy in something that I can have in Christ. But it's almost like alcohol is actively fighting against like the things of the spirit. Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
great. Wow. So what is I'm so excited to dive into like the practical, like health, body, mental, like all of it. But for somebody who might be listening who really does not like the relationship with alcohol, or wants to be like continue in their sobriety but maybe is struggling to, do you have like a encouragement for them biblically, just to continue in that, or to maybe like reevaluate the relationship with alcohol if they're sitting here like, actually I don't think I have a healthy relationship with alcohol? What would be an encouragement for that person to take a step or continue in the path that they're on?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would love to say is just like know that you're not alone. That
Mhm.
so many women, so many men and women, obviously, but we're talking to women today, like really do struggle with this, and that it's also not your fault. We touched on the actual chemical, ethanol is, which is what wine and alcohol is very, very highly addictive. And the reason that we don't necessarily think that off the top of our heads or associate it even with like drugs, right? We say drugs and alcohol. We don't just say drugs, is because of all this messaging that we are taking in our subconscious on a day to day basis. And that is from our friends, and that is from family, and that is from social media and memes and TV and movies. And we're getting it from everywhere, right? And so it's just about knowing that it's not your fault, that it is something that can get you hooked, but like to get really curious about like how it's serving you. Is it getting in the way? Is it getting in the way of your relationship with your friends, family, and Jesus? Like it was, instead of saying, am I drinking too much? It's like, could my life be better without it? Like all of
Mhm.
this stuff is just, and I think those messages, like you said, there's a cultural shift and they're happening more and more. But I know that I needed to hear that when I was first starting this journey. It's just like, okay, this wasn't my fault. God is mighty in me. Like this thing that I'm struggling with, he's going to use for his good and his glory. And so
Yeah.
that wasn't just one thing, that was about 15 things.
No, that was all so good. That was so good, all of it. That was such a sweet encouragement. I love too that you changed the question from like, am I drinking too much to like, is this something that I could be better without, or like, how is this benefiting me? It's such a big mindset shift, but I think such a important one, because I think too, it almost takes away from a condemnation maybe to like, all right, like,
Yeah.
how can I move forward in Christ? Like, how can I drop this and see like, all right, what is it like inhibiting my relationship with the Lord? And, would my life be better without it? I think that's so good. That's so good.
Yeah, and just to respond to that, because it's also so important to note, we know there's no condemnation in Christ Jesus. We get really stuck in this shame spiral when we are struggling with our drinking. We think that it is something that needs more willpower and more determination. And if we can just stick to 2 glasses, if we can just figure out how to moderate and unlock this like secret code of like how to handle alcohol, right? All of these things. But when we continually like quote unquote fail at doing that, like we do get really stuck in shame. And the problem is that when we're stuck in shame, we're stuck in the part of our brain where it's like fight or flight, and we can't make a good rational decision. We can't
Mm,
use our prefrontal cortex. We're stuck in this place of just like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm just horrible. I can't moderate. It's all my fault. Like, and what do we do when we get in that horrible, horrible place? Is, at least for me and most of the people I talk to, is we reach for a drink because we think it makes us feel better. And so the shame is also a very, very big part of it with how I coach clients. It's coming to this from a place of grace and compassion and curiosity and like learning about all of this, as opposed to beating ourselves up for not being able to like crack this magical code of an
yeah.
addictive substance.
Yeah. Oh, I think, yeah, that's just so good. I want to pivot into, because you had mentioned like, grace, but also curiosity, and really
Yeah.
dive into, and you mentioned this before, how a big part of you letting go of alcohol and consistently drinking was, recognizing how it actually made you feel, but also learning about it. And I think that's so important because, like you said, we have heard that like, oh, like red wine is actually good for my health, or, like different things, or that it's harmless, if I'm not, anyway. But there has been so much information coming out just about alcohol, even like having one glass and the effects that that can have on your like
Hmm.
organs, your body, all of it. And like we've mentioned, I think there is such a big shift from your everyday person to celebrities who are just cutting like cold turkey basically and choosing sobriety. So what do you think are just very practical reasons for that? Because I think in, society at large, it's probably not biblical reasons, like practical reasons that people
Yeah.
are cutting. And what should we really know about alcohol? And you've mentioned a lot already, so some of it might be repeating, but yeah, what are things that we should actually know about consuming alcohol? Period.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild and crazy times right now. It feels like there's new science coming out every single day, honestly, about how harmful alcohol is. Um, I think that we grew up knowing that it's not great for our liver, right?
Yeah.
But it was something crazy. I was just listening to a doctor talk about how coming through the pandemic, it's actually young women for the first time in history. There's like the lists of needing liver transplants because of drinking as a result of the pandemic in young women in their early 20s even. and 30, like the list that there's not enough livers. And so we kind of know that, but I think because of the pandemic, we're just seeing so much more science about how horribly it's affecting us. We touched on the fact that we kind of grew up with this idea of red wine being good for the heart. Like, that study has been completely debunked. It was fully funded by big alcohol. They basically found one, decent ingredient called resveratrol. I'm butchering the name, and saying that is good for the heart. And they've, new science is basically saying there's not enough of it in a glass of wine to actually have an effect, and that actually it's, wine is so bad for the heart. It's horrible for the arteries, and everything like that. The World Heart Federation last year said, no amount of alcohol is good for the heart. And like, I think we talked about it, like you mentioned in the notes, like gut health, it's horrible for gut health. But the one thing that was really shocking, and that the majority of Americans do not know, is the risk to cancers, and specifically for women, breast cancer. 3 drinks a week raises your risk of breast cancer by 15%. Yeah. And then it goes up, per drink from that. And so it's just, unfortunately, I feel like I keep having more and more kind of women friends and friends of friends, like, with these diagnoses now. And I'm just like, why aren't we talking about this? The majority of America doesn't know that fact. It's also linked to like 6 other types of cancer: stomach, colon, esophagus, all these other cancers. But like, for women, we do all these things to live healthy, right? We try to eat right, and we try to make sure we get enough green juice and protein, and what milk are we gonna, like, I used to joke, if I spent enough time thinking about my wine as I did what milk I was gonna drink. Was it gonna be almond or oat? Like, I would have probably been in a better position, but we don't think about wine. We don't think about it. And so thankfully there is a lot of science to this, to all of this now. Ireland is the first really brave country who's going to come out and put labels saying the cancer risk on both wine and spirits. So that's really big. Canada just came out like last week or the week before, basically saying that completely overhauling their drinking guidelines, and saying that if you don't want any risk to your health, don't drink. If you want a mild risk to your health, this includes the cancer stuff, then have 2 drinks a week. Which, like, I laugh, because like, that was just completely like a ridiculous notion of having 2 drinks a week.
Yeah, I think you just think about society, like whether it's college or, like you said, like mommy juice, like whatever it is, like 2 drinks a week, I think as a culture seems very, very little. And so to bring it to that is like, okay, that's a game changer. It's huge. And to know that even just that is going to have an effect on your health.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. We know so much more. They're saying, so many researchers and everyone is saying that in a few generations, and for the sake of my own kids, I hope it's sooner than later, that alcohol is going the way of the cigarette. We're going to know so much about how bad it is for us, that we're going to look back and think, oh my gosh, how could we have been drinking like that? Which is wild to think about, right?
Yeah. I know. I think I read that in an article somewhere, and it's really crazy to think about, because it is so promoted. Even I'm binging like Gilmore Girls right now, and it's just funny, which is such like a lighthearted show, but they have, their Friday night dinners, and it's just like clockwork, like, oh, what drink do you want? What drink do you want? And like refills and all. So even just in a very like safe, comfortable environment, just like how much alcohol is totally normal. So I think it really will be interesting the more that comes out about alcohol, and seeing, looking back and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that we as a society consumed that much of it. That's so crazy.
Yeah. And that we thought it was not only okay, but then, gave a hard time to those, because that's another big thing that I deal with clients, right? Is that people are afraid. They're afraid that they want to make this decision and go alcohol free, of what their friends are going to say, and they're afraid of kind of being the joy kill, the buzz kill. But it's like, I just, yeah, I mean, it's just wild.
Yeah, no, I'd actually love to. I'm glad you brought that up, dive into that, because I think that is such a big setback for a lot of people who maybe are leaning towards they want to stop. And for you, and I think I remember hearing this a lot in your testimony on your podcast, like you were surrounded by people who just were drinking all the time. Like you said, it was at work, literally in the building. And like, you're with your kids, like drinking like rosé or something, all of your friends. So yeah, do you have, I guess, encouragement or like very practical tips or I don't know, motivation for people who are like, all of my friends drink, like maybe our relationships are centered on drinking even. How would you advise that person? Because I think that that's just it's so real. Yeah.
Yeah, I honestly remember within the first few weeks of like me on this journey, like standing in the shower and literally listing out every single girlfriend I had and like asking myself, are they gonna stick around if I don't drink anymore? Is this friend gonna stay? And I was petrified. It was the thing that like kept me like I think stuck longer than anything else was just the fear of what other people were gonna think about me.
Yeah.
Um, but then when I started to really just get really confident, and it definitely took time, it wasn't easy, but I found out who my true friends were. It ended up being this massive blessing. God did a whole work in my friendships. He literally took people out of my life and he brought new people in my life. And then he solidified these friendships that I was worried about. And so he made it really clear for me who were my friends or who my people were. And so one of these one of the things that I was most nervous about ended up being the biggest blessings. One of the things that I think is most helpful for other people to hear that have this fear is just that when people do, if they give you a hard time for not having something to drink, that is 100% about them and not you, right? They want to know really why you're not drinking, because if you're not drinking, does that mean they have to not drink? And
Mm,
if they don't drink, what's wrong with them? And do they have a problem? And are they an alcoholic? And all these, it goes to this whole spiral. It goes back to subconscious conditioning. This is how we've been brought up to believe that you're either a normal drinker and you're totally cool, or you have a big problem over here and you're an alcoholic and you can't have any fun.
yeah.
Um, and so when I realized that and then saw it in action, right? The people that would give me a hard time were definitely people that probably, no judgment, hashtag no judgment, but that
Yeah.
probably needed to take a look at it for themselves. And so when I realized it wasn't really about me, it was about them. And, we could have a whole conversation about labels, but you don't have to use those labels and you don't have to go about it that shamey kind of way. And that just like not drinking is such a great thing for your health. Like, do you really want to sacrifice, your health and your well-being for somebody else because they, might think you're boring?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so good because I feel like I've seen that so much and even seen the fear of people who don't drink who are like, right, we're going to this event. Like, what do I have a Coke instead? You know what I mean? Like, where you kind of feel,
Yeah.
and I think that's because as a culture, we really make drinking feel so like adult and mature, quote unquote. And if you have something else, then it's so like childish versus really, like you said, like, right, I'm taking care of my health. I am being like obedient to the convictions that the Lord gave me, like, mind, body, spirit, all of it. But I think it is so hard because I think as a culture, we've really like emphasized drinking. And two, like if you're not drinking, like what is wrong with you? And I've seen those videos too, where it's like people are asking you then, like if you're choosing not to drink, like, oh, do you have a problem with it? Like, can you not handle it? And then it almost feels like, all right, like, am I incapable like of having this? And it's like, no. But I love that you spun it into be like, well, they probably just don't want to have to question like why, should they not be having a drink too? And it's something on them, not on you for choosing to not consume.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love
So
that.
true.
That's so
Yeah.
good.
It's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. This has been so good. I just love everything that we've covered, like talking about the Bible verses and Jesus. turning water into wine, and just like the different verses that we talked about with Timothy, and like kind of going through all of those things. And then two, just practically like all of the reasons that drinking actually is not going to be beneficial. And two, just that last bit of advice for somebody who might be peer pressured, quote unquote. And peer pressure happens all throughout life, not just like high school or something. So peer pressure.
It's true. Yeah.
Having it. So thank you so much. Before we wrap up, where can people find you? You have a book coming out, you have a podcast, and you are a coach, a sobriety coach. So where can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm super active on Instagram, which is at Love Life Sober with Christy, and Christy Christy. And then my website is lovelifesober.com. I'm currently writing the book, which is really exciting. My manuscript is due in May, and it's going to come out next year. But that's going to be a 40-day like reset, alcohol reset, which I'm really excited about. Working with an awesome publisher on that, so it's super exciting. And then my podcast is "But Jesus Drank Wine and Other Stories That Kept Us Stuck," which you can find on all the places you can find podcasts. And if you need links to that, it's on my Instagram and on my website and everything like that. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Megan. Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun.